Hello and welcome back to the Ultra Films YouTube channel. My name is Evan. I'm your host today. I'm the producer here at Ultra Films. Today we are talking about Uncharted, and let's just get this out of the way because critics seem to hate this film. On IMDb it has a 6.7 out of 10. On Rotten Tomatoes the critics have it at a 41% as of right now. On Google it's somewhere in between 60 and 70 last I've checked. However, the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which is pretty accurate for the most part, at least has a better consensus I think than critics, has a 90% approval rating from the audience. So this movie is very well received by many, except for some of the people judging it. I have my own theories as to why. We can maybe talk about that later on, but let's talk about why this movie is great. So, Tom Holland, wonderful, wonderful man, does a great job in the lead role as Nathan Drake. Many people, one of the harsher reasons that people are criticizing this movie is because he's not the Nathan Drake we know from the game series. This is a Nathan Drake who's 25 years old, rather than the 30-plus-year-old in the games that we know about, who's already been on all these adventures, kind of. And they all, I guess another big thing that people tear this movie apart about is that it doesn't follow the exact storyline of any of the games, but rather takes pieces from some of them and kind of meshes it all together to tell an origin story that doesn't follow any of the games. And I guess I would understand that if the story was told very poorly, as people not liking it and saying, wow, this was really bad, you should have just told the story from one of the games. However, I think they did a really good job telling the story of who Nathan Drake is before he starts exploring and as he's ultimately just figuring himself out in the world and where he wants to actually go, because he's kind of just been a bartender who steals from people for as long as he has been an adult so far. So that's where we get set up. And very early on in the film, as you know, Nathan's being a bartender, Sully comes in and observes him stealing a little bracelet off of unsuspecting woman, and knows instantly that it is Sam's brother, who we know is Nathan's brother. Nathan is Sam's brother, who we understand that connection. So essentially, Sully has this offer for him and knows his brother, or in this case, knew his brother formerly and since his lost touch, but essentially they want to go find Magellan's treasure, and they go through this whole journey to get there. With many, many challenges and other people trying to also obtain the same treasure that they're looking for. It kind of functions like a buddy cop movie, which I really, really like. I really enjoy the dynamic between Tom Holland and Mark Wahlberg. They have really good chemistry on screen. They're super funny together, and almost everything they share is like electric. I love it. All the other supporting characters do a good job, but like any time that you see those two together, their chemistry is just perfect. And I think that's probably what makes this movie as great as it is like those two in particular. But the story itself is very compelling. The hardships that they face and the tasks and puzzles they have to complete are somewhat life-threatening and suspenseful enough to, you know, scare you into going, oh shit, what's gonna happen? But also it's like believable enough that they can get out of it. So it's not a scenario where, oh, there's no way they should have survived, aside from maybe the jumping out of the airplane stunt. One thing I will say about this movie is some of those stunts, in that in particular, are literally gravity defying. If anybody, it's the scene from the trailer where they jump from box to box. If it's Tom Holland jumping from like box to box to get back onto the plane, and then he gets hit by the car. If that were to happen in real life, and you were trying to jump mid-air while flying however many miles per hour, 500 plus, and you jumped and let go and had no point of contact, you would fly and you would not be able to propel yourself forward enough, no matter how strong you are. It's physically impossible to do something like that. So that scene is a little iffy, but overall, like, the action scenes and the stunts are pretty good outside of that. The fight choreography between Tom and like all the henchmen and even like the other treasure hunters that are going after this treasure are all really well done. And I'm trying to find in my head like something to compare it to, like what level it's on. Maybe we'll come back to that. There's like a fight scene in particular, like when they ultimately do reach the end goal and find the treasure, they're on the boat as it's being helicoptered out. So Braddock is the villain of this movie in all actuality, and Braddock has chosen to steal these ships, Magellan's cruise ships, and fly them out, so back to a freighter ship, and ultimately Sully and Nate steal one of the helicopters, and go through this big old chase scene. On the boat, simultaneously, Nathan Drake, so Sully's up piloting this helicopter, and Nathan Drake is downstairs fighting off these random bodyguards or henchmen or whatever you want to call them, and he's taking them out. And the fight scenes that they do are pretty realistic and pretty suspenseful in themselves. That just ultimately build to this climax. There's also Chloe Fraser, who is there to help Nate and Sully, but ultimately stabs them in the back and is ultimately trying to find this treasure by herself. It's a big game of no one trusts each other, and I think, ultimately Nathan gives her wrong coordinates in hopes that she wouldn't run off alone without him, that she'd wait for him to wake up after he discovered the secret. He hid the actual coordinates in a bottle and let her go and run off. And he kind of like learned the tricks of the trade from Sully throughout the movie, and ultimately shows his maturity in a way that's like immature and not trusting people. And like the maturity is that he goes from like, oh, I can trust anybody, like this girl cares and wants to be, wants to help me out and like has good faith, to, okay, this is every man for themselves, I can't trust anybody. In the same way that except for Sully. And the big moment where Sully ultimately chooses to be more human than greed is he's faced with the challenge of saving Nathan from Braddock right below, or taking the gold that he stored in his backpack from earlier, and he uses that to throw it at Braddock and ultimately chooses to save Nathan rather than the other way around. And so rather than letting Nathan Drake fall and being the greedy person that everybody has claimed he is and the selfish man that everybody has said he is throughout the film, he chooses to save Nathan and forget about the gold because he's appreciating the journey and the adventure side of it more than the money aspect. I also liked how the twists that they made weren't necessarily double crosses every single time, or triple crosses or quadruple crosses. They made them the same person crossing over multiple people. So like Braddock went behind Moncada and ultimately slit his throat, killing him in pursuit of this treasure. Chloe backstabbed Sullivan and Nathan and took the map initially. And what else? Who else stabbed each other in the back? There's plenty of them. And all this backstabbing leads to like the suspense of it and builds it up even more so. And especially with the case with Braddock murdering Moncada, Moncada looks to be this treacherous villain who's there to steal his fortune back and what is rightfully his, and he's just acting off his best family intentions, and all of a sudden Braddock murders him, and you go, holy shit, she's ruthless. And it makes you terrified of her, which is how you're supposed to feel about her character. And ultimately, we see her fall into the sea at that helicopter chase, and the ship gets dropped on her after it. They got stuck by the anchor. The whole ship drops because Sully drops it with the helicopter and supposedly kills her. However, it's not directly shown, so there's possibility that Braddock's still alive out there. She survived that hit from a giant ship somehow. I don't know for sure. We'll have to see. But one of the things that I think that the film does very great at the very end is it tees up with the final scene of the actual movie and a mid-credit scene, an entire sequel with lots of new potential ideas and new ways to integrate characters that we know from the game series, but we haven't fully seen. We've seen them, but not, it's just like a quick shot of them. So one of the things it tees up perfectly in that last scene is it sets up Sam, Nathan's brother, and we find out he's alive. He's still writing these postcards and letters from a jail cell. So he's not dead as everybody has suspected this entire time, but he is locked up somewhere. And ultimately, I'm sure there's going to be some sort of jailbreak, and that we'll see Nathan save Sam, or that I don't know exactly what will happen. Again, I told you, I said earlier that I'm not super familiar with 1 through 3 of Uncharted. I've only played through some of 4. So I don't know if there's something in particular that we're going to see from those earlier games. If you guys have any ideas of how he gets out of jail, let me know in the comments for sure. And the mid-credit scene also sets up a surprise antagonist, potentially Chloe, or potentially Braddock, or somebody new that we haven't seen yet, who stops them at the end of the mid-credit scene, where they're about to leave with a new map to go on another search, or another adventure, and they turn around with a gun pointed to their face and they go, oh shit. And that's the end of the mid-credit scene. So it leaves us with all this stuff to explore in a sequel, and I'm almost certain that they will greenlight it. It killed it in the box office, absolutely destroyed its projected numbers, and I think in part of that is because of this guy over here, Tom Holland, but also just it's a fun movie. It's not necessarily a family-friendly one. There's, what is it rated? It is rated PG-13, but it is a little bit bloody and like murderous. There's people flying off of planes and without parachutes, getting like thrown out of planes without parachutes, shot, thrown off of boats flying in the air. There's somebody slit in the neck. Like there's a lot of indirect violence going on, and so it's not, maybe not the best family-friendly movie, but it is a very fun movie to watch. So I understand why it performed well and why people maybe have seen it twice, gone a third time. I certainly would want to, but I have too many other projects to cover on my plate, so I can't really afford to do that. And lastly, before I forget, the best part of the entire movie is the Scotsman. It's one of Braddock's henchmen, and he has this Scottish accent. It's from the trailer where Nathan, I'm sorry, is in the back fiddling with the lights or something like that, or the power source in the Galleria where they're doing the auction. And the Scotsman comes in and has this super, super heavy accent, and Nathan Drake has no idea what he's even saying, and he even straight up says it in the movie, I don't have any clue what you said, I'm so sorry. And the whole fight scene there, and every other line that he has is just there to, it's not like to mock his accent, but just to like, it kind of like reduces the gravity of every scenario, because it's funny, and the way he like handles the situation is like in this serious manner, but he doesn't, the tone of the voice doesn't match the seriousness of the situation, and it becomes ironic. Overall, a fantastic movie. If I had to give it a rating on our Ultra Films scale, which goes from 1 to 5, I'd probably give it a 4, which is a great film. So we go 1 unwatchable, 2 is watchable, 3 is good, 4 is great, and 5 becomes an Ultra film. I'd probably give it a 4. Like, I really do think it's great. I'd give it a 4 because I think there's like some minor flaws in the pacing of the story, and then I think that some of the relationships are predicated on the games that aren't necessarily fully fleshed out. Like between Chloe and Sullivan, there's like a predetermined relationship where they've worked together in the past as treasure hunters, and they've stabbed each other in the back and they've lied to each other, but it seems a little disconnected from like her stealing the cross from Nathan in his bag and completely leaving them in the dust multiple times. It's from the games, and there's the lore there, and maybe that's why some critics don't necessarily grip the whole story completely. Maybe that's part of why some of their reviews are so negative. I haven't read them because I don't care for what they have to say. I know how I felt about the film and enjoyed it, so there's no point in me trying to figure out things to criticize more if I personally enjoyed it and would love to see what they do in the sequel. And so with that, I leave you with my full review, and I hope you guys enjoyed hearing me talk about this film. Let me know what you thought about it in the comment section. Let me know how you think about a younger version of Nathan Drake. Let me know what you expect from a sequel to this movie, and if you want them to follow more of like the game's path from here on out. Because I mean, I'm pretty open to anything, but ultimately it makes me want to go play Uncharted 1, 2, and 3. So maybe I'll have some ideas of my own here soon. But I think that is just about all I have got to say. Thank you for watching here at Ultra Films, and I will see you again here soon in another video. Until then, have a good one. Peace. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.